Hello, Year 6. Welcome to your Friday Big Read lesson. We've managed to make it through the first week already. Our walk today is to understand the authorial technique of foreshadowing. And again, there's quite a lot to unpick there. So let's just have a look at two of the words that I think a few people might be a little less familiar with. So firstly, authorial. Authorial just means something that an author would do. Someone who writes books or texts of any sort uses authorial techniques. And the authorial technique we're looking at today is foreshadowing. Now, I'm not going to go into loads of detail right now about what foreshadowing is, because that's what I'm going to talk about once we've got started with the lesson. But the wolf for today is, well, there we go again, to define what foreshadowing is in your own words. So I will be talking about that in a moment. To identify areas where foreshadowing has occurred, and to answer questions about foreshadowing. So I think it's probably about time that we talk about that word foreshadowing then. Now, foreshadowing is, as I say, an authorial technique, and it's an authorial technique that is used to hint at things that haven't happened yet, things that are still to happen, things that are coming up in the text, or in this case, the film. They're often really difficult to spot unless you know what happens in the whole story. So quite often you have to watch or read the whole thing, and then you can look back, you can read or watch it again with what we call hindsight. Hindsight is a knowledge of something that's coming up already. So it's being able to look back at something. And you often don't spot foreshadowing until you look back, until you've read a text and then read it back again, or until you've watched a film and then look back at it again. Now, it's quite a popular thing these days. Marvel films do it a lot. They put hints and tips about what might happen in the future of Marvel films in earlier Marvel films. But these days, they don't call it foreshadowing. It tends to be called Easter eggs. Where's that come from? Okay, right. Not that sort of Easter egg. I don't mean the one brought to you by the Easter Bunny. When I talk about Easter eggs, I'm talking about foreshadowing. So those little hints, those little tips that might suggest to you what is going to happen in the rest of that story. So I think we can safely get rid of me as an Easter Bunny. So another way of looking at it is it's like predicting the future. It's hints, tips, suggestions that allow us to predict what might happen. And if you can spot those hints that the authors leave, then you tend to get real clues about what's going to happen in the future of your story. It's almost like being able to predict what is coming up with a lot more certainty than we normally would have. So that's a lot of information there. That is what foreshadowing is, though. You're going to be able to, in your task 1 or task 2, can't quite remember, in your task on your PDF, you're going to be able to now explain that in your own words. You don't need to go into as much detail as that, but that gives you a good idea of what foreshadowing actually is. So you're given 3 pictures on your PDF, and each of those pictures has something in it that foreshadows the events of Francis. It's important that you have a really clear memory of what the events of Francis are all the way through. So if you can't quite remember what happens in the story, you definitely need to go back and re-watch that video. I've provided the link for you again on your PDF, so do have a look at that and go back and watch the video. Because unless you know what happens at the end, you aren't going to be able to spot things that foreshadow what happens at the end. You are going to have to look really carefully and do your best job of being a detective to be able to spot those little clues, those little hints, those little bits of foreshadowing. But in this picture here, for example, what can we see? Well, we can see a young boy sat at a desk, and he has various things around him, posters on the wall, got stuff on his shelves. He's got a fish tank with lots of different things in it. You've got a close-up of that fish tank, so we're not going to talk about that fish tank just yet. But one thing that jumps out at me, knowing about the end of Francis and knowing at the end of Francis, she goes out onto a lake and disappears. And we know that there was something banging and thumping against the bottom of her boat. So looking around at that room, there is one thing that immediately jumps out at me, and it's that poster just there. Now, I'm not going to say why that jumps out at me. I'm going to leave that to you. But I think that right there is a brilliant little bit of foreshadowing on the part of the creator of this film. Now, you need to think, what on earth has that poster got to do with foreshadowing the rest of the story? And when you've thought about that, you can start using it in your write-up of ways in which you think the ending of the story is foreshadowed. There are other hints in the other two pictures as well. You might find other hints in this picture, to be fair. Just because I've pointed out one doesn't mean it's the only one. Like I say, though, you do have a picture that is a close-up of that fish tank. So probably for now, don't mention anything to do with the fish tank. The fish tank, I will just say to you right now, is full of foreshadowing hints, I believe, about Frances, what happens to her, and how the film ends. So make sure you look very carefully at that picture of the fish tank. There is definitely going to be some good foreshadowing bits in there. Okay, that's pretty much everything I've got to say to you about foreshadowing and everything you need for today's big read. Make sure you get stuck into that. Get as much done as you can, write in as much detail as you can manage. I know that I'm giving loads of dojo points out at the moment to people who are really impressing me, so do keep it up. As ever, when you've done that, make sure you're then taking a picture, scanning it in, typing it up, whatever it is you want to do, and sending that through to me if you're in Cyprus and to Miss Barrett if you're in Banyan. But for now, that's everything I've got to tell you, and I'll speak to you in, let's say, half an hour's time or something like that. And I can then talk you through your English for today. Best of luck, and I'll speak to you again very soon. But for now, goodbye.